Happy Monday, everybody. How's it going?
Happy Monday, Joe. It's going well. Welcome, Andrew.
Andrew, hello.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Good to have you here.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
It's an
awesome.
honor.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think I've seen you on LinkedIn forever, and then I don't know, connected, and I'm like, you'd be awesome on the show. So here we are. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Andrew Padilla. My background is in software engineering. Most of my career has been basically in working for data management companies or independent consulting in that space, and currently doing independent consulting. And one of my main focuses, I think, of the topic we'll at least start with today is the topic around open data and what we can learn from that, and perhaps the enterprise space. But we can go wherever you guys like. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, whatever we like. Yeah, let that be how it is. We'll probably cover a bunch of stuff. By the way, so for the audience out there, Matt's camera's off because he's at a hotel with a questionable Wi-Fi bandwidth. So
Yeah, so hopefully my audio doesn't freeze, but we'll see. Let me know if you can't hear me.
I'm just fine. Just keep it that way. So anyway, yeah. So the title of this is data collaboration for the outside in. And so yeah, what's on your mind with this, Andrew?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started doing consulting about 3 or 4 years ago, and one of the first customers I came across, I did a local conference here on metadata and metadata management. And I was approached after the conference by somebody who worked in the community, and he was working with this group that was trying to provide open water metadata for the state of New Mexico. And so that intrigued me, and I started talking to the folks there, and then got on board doing some consulting, helping them with their engineering tasks, right? And I just found, it fascinating, all the challenges that they have in offering open data to, a spectrum of users in the community. Like, they actually don't necessarily know who the users are. And so it creates some unique and some might say intractable problems. And I think there's a lot to be learned for solving that problem and bringing it hence from the outside into the enterprise. And I guess that's kind of where I get getting the title from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Why do you think open data? I don't know, what do you think are some of the challenges around it? Why is this hard?
Yeah, good question. There's a number of challenges. One of them is that you have a number of different types of personas there, and you don't necessarily know who they are, and so the feedback loop there sometimes is non-existent. You don't always know who your consumers are. You don't necessarily know what standards are in place that are similar to yours, and so how do you solve that problem? I'll give you an example. In New Mexico, we have our own standards around the same types of concepts, yet the U.S. Geological Survey also has their own, dealing with the same types of data. And then there are other nonprofit organizations that have their own data collection. So in the end, the user just wants data around, in this case, a certain geographical location. They don't really care where it comes from. And so that's a unique problem. How do I get data that I'm interested in for a geolocation? I don't care where it comes from. So that has a lot of implications in architecture, et cetera. But I find that
Mm.
fascinating. And how do you make it consistent? Um, Another challenge in open data is there's not a bidirectional feedback necessarily. A lot of it in this most simplistic form is I've got some CSV files I want to dump from some institution and put it out there. Maybe it has metadata, maybe it doesn't. But the people who use it often are interested in it and have a stake in it. They know a lot about the data. If there is bidirectional kind of feedback between, say, the users and these institutions, it could be a much richer environment, set the stage for how we share data in in the enterprise, et cetera, like we do in software. So my background is in software engineering. We've achieved that with Git, right? Um, Pull requests are kind of a workflow that we would do with that. We don't have that necessarily in the open data world, and I think it's pretty limited in the enterprise as well.
Well, and it's interesting to hear you talk about this because these are very similar to problems we have in the enterprise. So, for example, the typical flow of data from a software application team to analytics teams. And often there isn't good communication from the analytics teams to the software team to say, hey, if you could reformat this data or change it in this way, the quality would be much better. We could do a lot more with it. Maybe we could even feed some back into your application for analytics purposes. It's a theme we just hear over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also to echo what Andrew was saying too, it's different departments too. So you said the U.S. Geological Survey is different than what New Mexico uses, right? Like some of the data or some of the terms. So I didn't know that. That's kind of crazy. I imagine that has impacts.
Yeah, it does. And one of the most interesting things about that is, as you grow, as you add more organizations that are interested or offering data sets around a given domain or topic, basically you're putting it out there to the world, and that's what open data is all about. As the scale grows, it's different than I think the enterprise. In the enterprise, what we're seeing today is we solve problems through adding new products, and it makes the complexity for the user more complicated. If you look at some of the things that we've done at great scale, Ethernet, Git, zero trust architecture, in the end, it kind of goes up in a curve. It's like, it's simple for two people to collaborate. Hey, I've got a Google account, Google Drive. Why don't you share your data with me? Give me a document. And then as you go up and start sharing within the organization, you're able to do it. We have standards. You guys talk about it all the time, but the complexity for the user sometimes gets worse. And we have a number of vendors who have, very hyper specialized solutions. But then as you keep going out to the world, it forces you to think, how do you solve the hard problems? And this is my opinion. How do you solve the hard problems and start making it super simple for the user, right? How do you make it easy for them to collaborate? How do you make it easy for them to share the data, no matter where they are and, what organization they belong to? Those things I think are yet to be solved, but if you bring it out to that scale, I think that's what happens. And I think we have precedent for that in other domains.
Interesting. Now, how do we solve this in data? Because again, I think you mentioned software, right? And I think it's the common trope that we have on the show where it feels like or data is like, decades behind the software world, and there's a lot to learn. Wait, I'm always struggling with this. Like, why do you think this shouldn't be that hard, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard. I think it's harder with data because data is often the object of these different disciplines. So like in software engineering, software kind of transforms data to produce derived data, right? Network architectures who have solved these problems at scale deliver data. So it's always the object of other disciplines. It's never been the subject of different it's always a function of something rather than something else being a function of it. So if you want to bring data into the next generation, all those other components that were the subject of data you need to turn that on its head, I think. And so data becomes the first class citizen, but you still need to incorporate the lessons learned from scaling those other things. Like, for instance, how do you share data across the world so that you can deliver? How is data addressable? Right now, we address data through, we have a host-based addressing scheme. So if I want to get data, I have to go to a specific host. We have CDNs, et cetera, but I think that's a problem. How do we replicate data so that there's not a burden on the producer? So in open data, one of the biggest problems, especially in third world countries, is I may be a scientist and I have some information I want to share, but I'm not in Europe or the States. I don't have an open data portal to go to. And if I offer data, I have to incur the burden of putting that data out there. If it gets popular, I have to pay those costs. So how can we spread the load? So that speaks to just the delivery of data. On the other side, in software engineering, how do we, Zhamak Degani, I've been kind of part of that community for a while, the data machine learning community. Yeah. She has a lot of good thoughts. She says that we should encapsulate those three elements: data, metadata, and code and logic. And I would agree. And I think at this scale, this is where it comes to a head. They all converge. And so that in a future world, we may, in fact, do that. We may have that may be the embodiment of knowledge. It's just data, metadata, and code as one unit, and that's how we deliver things, and we do it in a distributed or decentralized manner. And the only place where it really makes sense, and it's funny, when I first started looking at data mesh, I thought this makes a lot of sense in cross-organizational collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
In a smaller shop or even a large organization, it almost seems contrived. Like, oh, I'm going to have my data in this domain, you have your data. But as you scale, it makes a lot more sense. So I think if data mesh is to succeed, I think a perfect use case is out there in the public domain for the commons, right? It's a natural separation between organizations, right, or institutions. And then as the tool set becomes mature, where we have implementations, we agree on something. For instance, it's de facto like Git. And there's a combination of all of these tool sets that we've had, and we bring it back to the enterprise. I think that's where it becomes simple to do something like data mesh, even if you're a small organization. Anyway, so a little bit of a rant, but that's what I'm thinking these days.
That's a great rant. I mean, it really resonates. We were talking before the show, Andrew, about the problems in academia, where even in the United States, where we have very good budgets for academic research, a lot of this data that's the output of research projects just sits on tapes or someone's laptop and is basically inaccessible by anyone else. And you publish the paper, and the paper cites some statistics, but that's all anyone else gets, right? They don't get to see the data behind the graphs that go into the paper, behind the statistical analysis.
Yep. And there's practical reasons for it. It's difficult for the researchers to use the existing tool sets, bring them all together and put them out there for a consumer to reproduce their data. It's not that it's not simple, right? And so if we were to collectively make that simpler at a global scale, so that anybody can take your work that you're describing in a paper and reproduce it easily, that's where we want to be, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, especially with academia, where it's a global thing too, right? Researchers work all over the world, and I mean, it's hard enough to get this correct at a national level, let alone internationally. But no, but what you're saying is, I think it's spot on. And yeah, when we were talking earlier too, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds. I wonder when he's going to bring up data mesh. So I'm glad you brought that up. I know you've been part of the community for a bit, and exactly what Jamak's describing, I think is definitely an ideal that or a state of the world that I know I can get along with. I know that some people may feel differently, but we all have opinions, don't we? So, but it sort of seems like it's the natural evolution towards something that would facilitate this type of collaboration, because I don't know how it'd work otherwise, right? Well, obviously, if what we have worked, we'd be doing it, and this wouldn't be a topic of discussion at this point. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
right. We'd be doing it. But I think this is an inevitability. At some point, as we get value out of our data within the organization, we're gonna, folks are already talking about the value of external data. When you pair it with internal organizational data, it makes a lot of sense. In the same way that all the Apache libraries on GitHub add value to your enterprise app, right? It's very similar in that sense. So if we lower the friction to be able to pull in public data sets, and we're able to incorporate them and rebuild them and create derivative data sets and put them back out there, and allow others to build other derivative data sets, that would be ideal. That's where we want to be. And that's what we're doing in software. We do that with networks. We're working on that in security with zero trust. How do we not get lazy about how we interface with others on data sets, and start thinking about working to the individual. Is the individual able to share? That's where it starts. If we're sharing at scale, is the individual able to offer a data set and collaborate with someone else without bringing in a massive amount of infrastructure? I think that's where participation for everyone needs to be, and it would bring in some interesting standards and architecture. We could achieve that.
You want to follow? Oh, go on, Matt.
Oh, I was going to say, I like that you cite GitHub. GitHub to me is interesting because it is, on the one hand, a successful collaboration between a private company and open source. So these days it's Microsoft and open source, but it also creates some problems. So for example, in principle, I can go download any of that open source code that's public. In practice, OpenAI gets preferential access to it because they can plug their pipes straight into GitHub because they have a deal with Microsoft. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? To what degree should this be a public-private partnership, and to what degree should it be maybe a government function?
Yeah, GitHub is interesting because they brought a lot to the table. They adopted Git early on. I think it was in 2005. The founders, said, "Hey, we need to start sharing this," and people don't necessarily want to put a Git server out there. It was a decentralized architecture, but they made it easy for the developers to do that. But in the process, they grew. It became popular, and now we really have a centralized place, a de facto standard. We do have GitLab. We have a Bitbucket that Atlassian. I think that's how you say it, Atlassian, whatever.
Atlassian, yep.
So there are other Git providers, but I do think that we should break up GitHub. Honestly, I think that there should be other alternatives, but my hats off to them for bringing sharing of software projects to the front. Now, where Git stops, and I think perhaps where we need to be, is what do we get from Git? We get source code. That is not an answer. In data, what are the people, you talk about this a lot, Joe. We want answers. The regular users want answers. They don't want tables. They want answers. Now, code is part of that equation. So it's an intermediate delivery. It's not the final product. So we can get to a point where we coalesce existing sources like GitHub and data sets that are in table form or whatever, and able to produce answers for groups of people who have interest in them at every level. Some people just want an answer. Some people want to dig in. Some people want the lineage. Those are all the varying requirements that I see in open data that really are setting a great use case for where we could be.
Mm. Yeah, and John Koki has a good point here. Git perfected the dev sharing experience, which it did, right? And so, and it's become the default, way of doing stuff. And the thing is, it's become, I can't remember who it was. Somebody showed me the other, or a post maybe on LinkedIn or something like that. But it was basically all the workflows in Git, and how they're, I think, basically running everything out of GitHub right now, GitHub Actions and so forth. It's become sort of the default. I wouldn't say IDE, but definitely a sharing environment, right? So I think it's a good experience, but extending that to data might be sort of the next wave. We'll see. On a related note, since we're talking about Microsoft, Donald Parrish on YouTube, he says has a point, which I don't know. Have you checked out Microsoft's Fabric yet?
I've read a little bit about it.
Okay. So anyway, here's what he says for the people listening on the podcast. Microsoft's new Fabric with OneLake may actually help collaboration in Microsoft Shops by making it easier to get data in and see in File Explorer. So, but I think this raises an interesting point because a lot of the friction that I know Matt and I have seen with data delivery, and I'm sure you've seen too, and data sharing is particularly acute, I would say, in, I don't know, quote, legacy shops. I might lump in it's a bit of a generalization, but with some old school Microsoft shops, definitely, I think, suffer from this. The notion right now is throw it all in SharePoint, and you can go find all your data there, and and that's about it. And so, I don't know if you have any thoughts on. It's more of an ecosystem type question, but
yeah, I mean, it's simpler for an organization that's Microsoft Shop to use what they have, and I think that's where we get into the curve as you go into an organization and they want to simplify things. The default reaction is to get a platform, one size fits all. Everybody's under 110. But the reality is, if you push that out to worldwide access, not everybody can be or wants to be on Microsoft. That's where it starts to shift. So that may be a solution for Microsoft customers. But what happens when you do cross-organizational collaboration? Are you going to ask another organization you need to get on Microsoft? Some might. How about 10, 20, 1,000? So then everybody has to own their own slice of the pie in some way, and it can't just be Microsoft. Microsoft may have an implementation of this future state, but it's not just Microsoft. So I agree that that may work within the enterprise or maybe even across partners, but keep expanding that. And what is the outcome become?
I mean, it might be Chat GPT. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly a popular topic.
I mean, I'm not kidding though. So
Yeah.
maybe that is the interface. You just, collaborate with everyone's data. I don't know. It's an interesting one though, because I think it's definitely going a step towards. I mean, because you're talking kind of a tale of two worlds, right? Because there's the internal organization friction of sharing data and collaborating, and then obviously between organizations, that's a whole different can of worms there. So
Yeah.
And I think for the former, just intra company collaboration, that's still tricky as hell, whether you're small or big. So
Certainly is.
yeah. But then across, I don't know. Maybe it might actually, in fact, be easier going across organizations than inside an organization. I could make an argument that actually might be simpler. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but
I mean, you could imagine a future where, much like GitHub has become the dominant Git and code sharing platform, maybe Microsoft becomes the dominant data sharing platform. There are advantages to that. Everyone knows that's kind of the one-stop shop for sharing data, but also big disadvantages, again, to put that under a private company. So I don't know if there's a future where somehow multiple big players can collaborate and say, this is our open standard. You can access data cross-platform. It seems unlikely that would happen. It seems unlikely that Google and Amazon and Microsoft would choose to collaborate on something like that. But
yeah,
who knows? I guess if we pushed for it, then maybe it's possible.
it's a good question. Yeah, 'cause, I mean, they'd have to have an incentive to do this, and right now it's, gloves are off, and they're just beating the crap out of each other. Them being the big cloud providers and big, the cloud data platforms that are not the big cloud providers. So, yeah, it's like a steel cage match right now. So coming to a holistic standard might happen. I don't know.
Let me ask you this, Andrew. What do you think about what's going on right now with model training data? So OpenAI used all kinds of data, including Stack Overflow and Reddit and all kinds of things to train GPT-4 and other models. And now these data providers are starting to lock that down and saying, no, under terms of service in the future, you can't train on our data without permission. What do you think about that trend?
I mean, generally, I think it's indicative of the Silicon Valley mindset that I've seen, that if I do the work, then I own it, right? It almost reminds me of there's this concept out in the West of homesteading land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you work the land, it's yours. And so in effect, I think it's wrong. Although the vendors who are collecting those aggregators don't own the data either. It's the people who are publishing it. Of course, there's party in agreement. So somehow we need to solve that. But I don't think it's right for them to be monetizing the outputs, their models, based on public data that humanity has given to them on a silver platter. That's just my opinion.
But I mean, that's what Google got rich off of too.
They did.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how this is solved. I mean, I think that some of the the incoming regulation in AI, maybe that will have an impact. Although what you're seeing right now is definitely regulatory capture by the big players too. I mean, Sam Altman was on his European tour recently, and maybe he's not going there because he likes Europe. So the vote was coming up, so he's making his stops and doing what he needed to do. I mean, he's trying to run a business too, so but that's been the name of the game since day one. Is if you have a chance of doing regulatory capture, you're going to go do it. So
I mean, look at Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Part of the reason he was able to slow down investigations into FTX is by claiming that he wanted regulations and going out and doing a lot of glad handing and a lot of donations.
Oh, he was a great guy, Matt. So yeah, I can't. On a side note, I can't wait for Michael Lewis's book to come out about Sam Bankman-Fried. That's going to be a good one to read. Michael Lewis being one of my favorite authors, but anyway, I digress. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and then there's some comments here. Let's just see here. Yeah, John Cook again. Internal collaboration is an op model, but needs a really low friction, easy to use marketplace. And for those outside of departments, agreed. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it's kind of rewinding a few minutes back. But
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the
oh, it should be on the screen here. John Cook's that's something here.
internal collaboration. It's not. Yeah, I agree. In essence, that's what I was trying to say is that
Yeah.
from the user's perspective, it has to be low friction.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's and the problem now as we transition towards that low friction, and we will, we're somewhere in purgatory where the burden is on the users to assemble all of these things together, and that's where we have this this tool hell, and likewise in open source, or I'm sorry, open data, it's the same thing. A colleague of mine calls all the data portals out there portal palooza. Everybody's offering a portal, but users aren't interested necessarily in who owns the portal. They're interested in data based on geographic region or some other thing. They don't care. So we make it easier for them. So no matter where it comes from, they can have access to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of the problem with the portals is there's not, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, but I can't tell if there's a standard way of creating a portal and serving data from a portal, right? So in a lot of cases, right, it might be a REST API. I think we've all written REST APIs. There's not really there are suggestions and specifications. It's not like anyone actually pays attention to these when they write the APIs. So. Right.
That's definitely the case. Yeah. I mean, we in New Mexico, we have a standard. We adopted Open Geospatial Consortium, the sensor API, because a lot of it's basically, sensor or type data, but that works as long as you stay in our house, right? And USGS also adopted it. So that's good. But if you go to another data set, they may have their own standard. Virtually every portal may have their own standard. They measure things. One measures it in centimeters. The other one measures the water, something else. They may have a different interpretation about what it means to be, how many inches, above or below the water, or things like that. It runs the gambit. So the problem is, how do you make it simpler for people to coalesce on things or be able to transform, A to B, and then be able to offer that. So the next person that comes by says, oh, someone already did this. I don't have to redo the work. That's where the burden lies. The burden needs to be lessened on the user of the data, and that's true also of enterprise, right? But it's just this is at a grand scale, which is where I think problems get solved. Like in a global scale.
Well, yeah, I agree. Right now, it feels like we're just gaslighting users.
Yeah.
It's like obviously you're too dumb to get the data. Duh. So it's like, what's your problem?
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Yeah, I mean, and it comes back to data mesh too. I think that what Jamak laid out is, I think, the blueprint to make it happen. I know that she started a company to make it happen, and there are definitely challenges. I mean, a lot of the stuff hasn't been done before. She's helping build the future, and that's the name of the game. If, like I said, if it were done already, then we wouldn't have to have the conversation. So, but it's a gnarly problem to solve.
Yep.
So yeah. Let me see what else has people said here. Yeah, it's kind of rewinding. Dan Everett, data sharing is going to be impacted. Lock it down. I think to your earlier comments, I think you may have differences of opinion on this, but yeah, what was it? Reddit, right? They had, I think all the users were pissed off because the APIs are being locked down, a week or two ago, and some people were predicting the death of Reddit as a result of that. I was just on Reddit a bit ago, and I didn't see that it was dead. It's still as active and toxic as ever. So it's.
Well, I think the interesting thing with Reddit, and the reason some people are claiming that it should be killed, is that so Reddit is responsible for the platform, but it's user-generated content, right? It's people spending a lot of time on Reddit moderating, writing, exchanging ideas. That's what drives Reddit. And same thing with Stack Overflow or GitHub. Lots of user-generated content, user-generated code, user-generated answers, questions, everything else. And so then this question arises, to what extent are those platforms responsible to make that user-generated content publicly available? And up to now, like Reddit at least has done that through APIs, and now they're locking that down and changing their mind. Same thing with Twitter, right? Twitter has really locked down access outside of the user account. It used to be much easier to get data scraping, for example.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was like, I rarely doom scroll Twitter, but on my flight back from Vancouver to Salt Lake City on a Friday evening, that was right as the 24-hour coup was going on in Russia. So, I was just like, what's happening? This is the most bizarre thing. And Reddit or Twitter was the only place I could read it, right? But it was definitely I mean, I have a burner Twitter account that I use, but it was like it's locked down. You used to be able to have a lot more access to it, and but that's like everything, right? I mean, I'm on other apps like Nextdoor. I have a burner account on that too, but I do like to see what's going on in my neighborhood. But there's no way in hell you're going to read that data if you don't have an account, right? So that's all user generated content as well. So it goes back to like, I don't know, Section 230 and all that fun stuff, which who knows the fate of that, but yeah.
That's actually interesting as well. I'll tie that back to my comment about the scientists in Africa who wants to publish a single data set. What's their burden? There's a burden to the publisher to offer the infrastructure for that particular piece of data. If it becomes popular, they're responsible. They incur the cost of putting it out there. In the same way, some of these social media platforms, they have to, well, they definitely have to pay for the cost of using their service every time someone wants some of that data that are hitting their APIs. They're paying for that. I wonder if there's not a future world where we share the content cost of serving the data. And there are some things out there in terms of technology. One I'm particularly interested in is IPFS, or the Interplanetary File System, where it's not one publisher. If I have a copy, then you can get it from me. So it's almost like a CDN. And I think if we had social media platforms that kind of subscribe to this model where it's not coming from one place, then the burden of the publisher is lessened, and perhaps it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But that's just me dreaming of a future world.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I think didn't Facebook just cut off new Facebook News access to Canada the other day because they didn't want to pay some sort of arrangement. Yeah, so it's like
in this case they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
If somebody else had it, they could serve it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one interesting thing here is that there are already commercial solutions to this. So, for example, Amazon S3. Amazon S3 has an option called Requester Pays, right? So actually you, as the person hosting the data, don't have to pay for that, but you still have to pay for the storage. And if you're storing a 100 terabyte data set, that's still a lot of money. And going back to the academic discussion earlier, some of these big data sets in physics or something can be hundreds of terabytes or petabytes or something. And the problem is that the grants that pay for the research that generates the data make no provision for you to say, all right, I'm also going to pay to store it for the next 20 years or something like this, so it's available. So part of this is a government policy issue, at least with academia and other government-funded research.
Yeah. I just want to go to a comment that Scott had here real quick. Scott Hurlman, aka LinkedIn user on StreamYard. He says in a bunch of data mesh implementations, the consumer does pay. Maybe there's a CDN bank at GitHub or something to pay for the cost of downloading. Do you have any thoughts on this, Andrew?
I think that's a better model, that if there are consumers who are interested in content, that they should, some of that, the payment should be pushed out to the consumer. And what does that imply? That implies that, that it's more equitable in the end. Sure, you're paying for it, but at the same time, you don't have someone that's holding all the purse strings to that data set and is concerned about that burden I talk about of the publisher. It goes away. So, and those that are interested in it they value it, correct? So they're paying for it in some way, even if it's just a little bit of money. If more people are interested, perhaps the cost is lessened. I mean, that's the kind of model. So yeah, I would agree with Scott on that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and it's an interesting one too, because I was thinking the other day, sort of along these lines about, I have various subscriptions. We're talking pretty pedestrian things. We're not talking about data sharing, for open data sets or whatever. But I have a subscription to like what New York Times, Wall Street Journal, a bunch of publications, and it'd be nice if I could just aggregate those all into one, and or if there's a model where it's just like pay to consume. An article might cost a fraction of a penny or something like that, sort of a streaming model. But it's like, why do I have to have all these subscriptions, right? In this day and age, why can't we just bundle this together and
right,
and pay that way? So, but things as they are, everything likes to be balkanized. So
that's a good idea. I mean, so you're paying for content. Where it comes from is immaterial, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just content. I pay for content. It happens to come from the New York Times or somewhere else. Yeah, I would definitely be on board with that.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually Val has a good question here. What about data rooms? I'm guessing these might be like data clean rooms, Val, if you want to elaborate on that. But he asks, can those be used to store open data cost effectively?
I'm not familiar with data rooms. Yeah, maybe he can clarify.
Yeah, I don't know if he's alluding to the notion of data clean rooms, but it's and it's in its area I'm actually not qualified to speak on, so I'll just ask Val to clarify it. So, well, anyway, we'll move on. If Val wants to get back to us on the answer, that'd be great. But
there's a good comment from Donald about pay for consumption makes a lot of sense, and yeah, there's precedent for it in music, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're doing it now, so
yeah. But it's an interesting model. I mean, I think that this, especially with, this kind of brings up the issue of data lineage too, I suppose, right? And traceability and attribution, right? But I think especially as we move into a world with, I do think things like interfacing with large language models and generative AI is just going to be table stakes. It's, that's how we're going to get a lot of our quote news in the future. Is it's just going to be synthesized. The creators of that content that was synthesized from, I think do deserve to have a seat at the table here, because otherwise, what's the incentive to create content anymore? Like absolutely zero. I being a content creator, Matt's a content creator. You create content. Like what, especially if your living does come from content. Like what would be the point otherwise? Like I'll just go find something else to do. Like go I don't know, herd cattle or something. So it's like it's just a point. Val got back to us with the clean rooms as well. He said data clean rooms, yes, but it expanded to data sharing and content aggregations, pay for consumption. Again, Matt, are you hip on data clean rooms at all?
I'm not. Now I want to go read up on data clean rooms and maybe continue the conversation around that later.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, sorry, we don't like to BS our way through answers, so we'll just we'll move on. So, yeah, I mean, I always see it on like Snowflake's, for example. They've been advertising their data clean room. I haven't had a chance to go look at it, so I'm gonna train either way. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look at their white papers on it and such.
Yeah, they're who knows? They probably have a bunch of stuff coming out this week because it's Snowflake Summit, so yeah. Are you going to a Snowflake Summit by any chance, Andrew, or any of the big conferences this week?
I am not. No.
You are not? Oh, okay.
Not as much of a world traveler as you guys. No.
Joe is more of a world traveler than I am. You just got back from Vancouver, so
that's basically America.
Don't tell Canada that it's America.
Well, we have our own Vancouver too.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually talking with a friend of mine, and he's over the weekend. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go do a rowing race in Vancouver." And it was like, I was like, "Which one?" He's like, "Oh, Washington." I was like, "Oh, never mind." That's like the anyway. I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, so kind of back to the topic at hand. I mean, we're talking about data collaboration. If you were to envision, kind of, Andrew's way forward to, make data collaboration a real thing over the next 5 years, like what are some steps you would take if you could wave a magic wand and this would be something you could do and control?
Yeah, at a high level, I would follow precedent, but like I talked about, that we've seen in software and elsewhere, right? So what does it mean for the consumer? The outcome would be that a user can collaborate with anyone or any institution without incurring any appreciable infrastructure costs. And they can have access to any data set, regardless of what institution or portal it came from. So it's an ideal decentralized model. And they're able to do everything that they need to do if they want to on their own machine, just like we do when we do, versioning in Git or et cetera. Or we could push out our projects to the cloud, or both, or maybe it's immaterial. But that's where I think we should be in terms of outcomes. I think we're somewhere like I said, somewhere on our way. But multi-cloud is making cloud commoditized now. So the idea of just Google offering data, open data portals, or maybe just Amazon or someone else, I think they're going to be, hopefully they'll be incentivized to go just to be a player and not just the sole source provider of important content, especially scientific data that belongs to the world, in my opinion. And if they want to be a player in terms of infrastructure, that's great. But they shouldn't be the only place to go to. And it shouldn't matter. It should be immaterial where you get it from. So, yeah.
Well, and going back to this whole discussion, I mean, on the one hand, cloud providers have already opened the door for open data. I mean, S3 and Google Cloud Storage and Microsoft's alternative blob storage. These are fantastic platforms for data sharing. On the other hand, a lot of their policies are highly, highly punitive, like data egress costs. They want you to land the data in Microsoft and never export it, or they're going to charge you a pile of money. Yeah. So how do we change that culture of saying, no, we have to start collaborating more. We have to get the data out there and not charge users so much money to get it. Yeah.
And I think that's also looking at not just from a data perspective, but that triad that Zhamak talks about, the data, metadata, logic, what does he call it? The architectural quantum. This future world would know. And I talked to a guy from Intel who did a lot of work with the US Navy, and he mentioned this as well. If I want to apply some algorithm I created, and I'm sitting here on my laptop in Albuquerque, New Mexico on this data set that's really large, this future system should know to ship the logic to wherever it's at, and then they charge me for compute, right? And I get the result, which may be a small data set. So I'm not downloading all the data. It knows, hey, this data is like 5 terabytes. I'm going to take this guy's logic and I'll bring it up to wherever the data lives, and I'm going to operate on it, and I'm going to create a project on his behalf or her behalf or whatever. And then the output, gets put out there, and maybe they get charged for that as well. But it's much smaller than pulling everything down. So it would have to be smart. That's taking into consideration all those things. How do you balance, the management of metadata, data, and logic within a project? Because all of those are important aspects to the knowledge that we're trying to get. Ultimately, that's what we want. We want answers. We want knowledge. And the digital embodiment are those three things, I think.
That's a really good point.
Well, I feel like this is related to what Val Goldine said here. Let me bring up this comment. I'll read it. This is where data quality becomes paramount, or it will be a wild west of data on these platforms. And who do you go to get data quality issues addressed? So I think you've been alluding to this, Andrew, about the bidirectional communication problems. And again, if a government puts data out there, who's responsible for the data quality?
Right. Yep. I've seen that many times, and there's just not a means for it. Often I actually heard it at a conference. I'm wearing the t-shirts to the conference I was at. But there was a scientist that said, I saw some data points that I downloaded from one of the state agencies, and it was a quick fix. But if I have to do a lot of work to get it fixed, I'm out. I don't want to do it.
Yep.
So that's the problem. So then it stays incorrect. See, that's why lowering the bar needs to happen in order for this to work, because that crowdsourcing element to data sets, you really can't have one institution or one organization say, I am the expert on this data. That's never the case. It's especially as you grow larger and larger. You need many, many minds to take a look at this and say, you know what, that's not right. I mean, that's how Wikipedia works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though that may not always necessarily be right, but there's a number of platforms we see in social media that do this. How do we do that for data sets simply that are public domain? How do we do that the enterprise. There may be someone, in the C-suite that sees something that just doesn't look right. Um, I like that analogy that Ben Stansel put out a few weeks ago, that sausage tastes a little different. I don't care how the hell it's made or something like that, but it tastes different. There are people that just instinctively know something's up.
Mm-hmm.
How can they offer that as they're looking at a data set? Simply. Now, that may happen in a single platform if you buy something from, say, who knows, Oracle or whoever. But how can you consistently offer and share that no matter what organization you're in? I think that's what I'm most interested in. How can we consistently do that?
Yeah, and as John Cook points out too, the challenge is everybody has a different purpose for data, so agreement is tricky.
That's true.
Yeah.
But there's also many versions of data that people can look at, and that's their source of truth, right?
Yeah.
So versioning is another, and lineage is very important in this workflow. It's actually essential, I think, and I don't think John would disagree with that.
Scott has another good question here. How do you think about data contracts and consumer-driven testing? Can you reasonably do versioning across potentially many consumers, or is it closer to super cordoned off collab zones between 2, maybe 3 orgs, and it's not really open data? There's a lot of questions there, so I'll let you parse through that.
Yeah, I like the idea of data contracts, but I don't know that. Someone mentioned it in a previous talk. It might have been in the data mesh community. They said the contract is defined by the consumer, and different consumers, as John just said, have different ideas as to what is correct. So in my mind, if we have data contracts implemented, it's based on a certain group of people, these self-selecting groups who define what the truth is, and their contracts may differ on the same or different versions of the same data set at the same time. It sounds complex, but that's the reality of things. People kind of coalesce together and say, this is what we think the truth is, and they hold on to that. So what's a digital embodiment of that? That may be a version of the data set with contracts that agree or enforce what they think. And that's the end of story for that group. Another group may have something else. But at least if you have lineage, you can draw the line between A and B. This person thinks of it this way. This person thinks of it that way. How can I connect the two together if you're another party coming into the equation for that data set or data sets?
Yeah, and I mean, if you kind of extend this idea to the practicality of how like legal teams work in a company, for example, right? If all contracts were standard, and I get, I'm extending the notion of a contract to a legal contract, but hey, it's a good analogy. Legal contracts are tricky, right? And there's a lot of nuance to them. And as a company, with your various customers and partners, whatever, you're going to have different contracts depending on the needs and goals of your relationship. And I think this is very, very similar to data contracts, right? There might be different SLAs regarding schema changes or whatever types of changes, data quality and so forth. But I think to your point, it's hard to imagine there's a one size fits all unless, again, this is, the situation where there's like one API and that's you get what you get. But when you're dealing with complex arrangements, say, data sharing between companies, I can imagine that the one size fits all is not going to really cut it for certain use cases. So
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I guess the notion of like a data contract being, I guess, coupled with a legal contract. But that's probably a topic for a different discussion. What are you going to say, Matt?
Interesting. I was just going to say there's a parallel here with open source software, right? So think about Linux. So the core Linux team tests the kernel as they're building it, and then they do a new deploy. But then it goes downstream to all these different distributions like Debian and Red Hat and Ubuntu, and then they do their own testing before they deploy it. And then when they find issues, they can send those upstream and say, hey, Linus, we have this problem with the kernel. It's not doing X, Y, and Z. And then further on, as it gets deployed out to users, there's more testing there. And so in principle, this is a nice model for data quality, too, that people, like as you've alluded to, Andrew, the people who consume that data actually become experts in it and can inform the upstream team about issues.
Perfect. Yeah, I like that analogy. That tie back. Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's see if there's any other questions here. Donald says it sounds like edge computing idea. I don't know. Does it seem like edge computing to you?
I don't necessarily know I'd characterize it as that, but yeah, in a sense. I mean, I think in the end, you know, it goes down to the individual. You know, as you expand the populace who's interested in data sets, it goes down to what are the preferences of the individual and how can they use it in the way that they want to use it. It is personalization to the extreme, but we have that in software, right? I can do that in software. I can do that in social media sites, have my own preferences of who I want to see on my feed, etc. Why don't we do that for data sets? When we get together as groups, we may come to consensus. That makes sense too. So those are the different kind of like, this is kind of like a multiverse of data, right? Which version do you want to be on?
Mm.
Which ones do you agree with? But in the end, it has to get down to the individual, I think. If it works for the individual, then you can always make it work for a group who agree with one another. It's a difficult problem to solve, right? But there are a lot of difficult problems that we have solved
Mm-hmm.
in the past that are not data, that are related to data. That's why I think there's hope.
I agree. I think we'll get there.
Yeah.
I think over the next 5 years, I think this. I mean, again, I think what you're kind of alluding to with we've done this before is in software, right? We've managed to overcome, I think, a lot of barriers that were maybe inconceivable, or just something else maybe you're alluding to.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I think I may be misquoting, but isn't there a Winston Churchill quote about Americans? They'll get to the right answer after they tried everything else first.
Yeah, it was Churchill.
In technology, that can be the case. We meander towards.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. You know, over on Friday, I was talking to the DAMA Vancouver chapter. You know, about the talk was data modeling is dead, long live data modeling, and the whole point of the conversation was, you know, we've been going in circles as a data industry for decades, right? And I feel like a lot of the stuff we've been trying to do, it ain't working. So we need a kick in the ass, try something different, and I think we'll get there. But you know, and I kind of called it out, you know, to the group. I was like, why are we still talking about the same stuff decade after decade? Getting more value from data, you know, getting more adoption of data. All these questions. I'm so senselessly bored with these conversations at this point that if we keep doing the same stuff, we're going to get the same results. And I know it's you know, maybe the apocryphal definition of insanity or something like that. But the whole point is, we need to take different approaches at this point. I mean, the sake of the fate of the industry is at stake right now. I hate to be so melodramatic, but it is. I mean, there's a lot of investment, a lot of attention, and this is time we can get it right. You know, and I think widen the adoption of data. This is also the chance we can colossally screw it up if we're not careful. So,
Yep.
You know, and things like this, I think it's a radical departure from what we've been doing, but it has to happen. And I don't even think it's that radical, really, but I think it's perceived as being radical because it doesn't fit within the neat confines of how, you know, we've been doing data forever. But again, just adopting, there's a lot of inspiration we can take from software. They had to do this out of necessity, and it's worked, right? There's software everywhere. So
I definitely would agree. It's amazing, not just in data, but generally in science. Even not a scientist, but I appreciate science, and I find even in data, I was looking at how the industry was evolving, how we query data. What is the latest technologies and algorithms? And I was looking at this one for graph. It's called worst case optimal join, and it's based on this tree algorithm that it's a way of indexing data. It was developed in the 1960s and then just put on a shelf. But it has a lot of promise. I think relational AI talks a lot about it, and it was also in this professor from CMU has a series on YouTube, and he was talking about how it works. And this has been known to a small community, and it isn't until the time is right and the use case is present, you know, where we have, and I think we're approaching that now. How can we easily join not just 10 tables, but thousands of tables and not have this performance impact that we have? This is a potential solution to that. I'm not saying it's the only solution, but this is promising. But it's been sitting on a shelf. at least
Right.
the core algorithm.
But it's like a lot of ideas, though. You know,
It is.
I mean, like domain-driven design. I mean, that sat on the shelf with respect to data people for ages. You know, I think a few people dared to tread into the realm of software and look at what Eric Evans has written, and Jamaica, I think, adopted that wholeheartedly, and it's like, yeah, domains. That's how we need to do things, and that opened the door. Now we're talking about data products as a real thing, right? And so that's, it reminds me of the other day. I was, back to that talk I was giving. I talked about how we need to look at the use of data model patterns, right? Conceptual patterns, and these were written about. Len Silverson wrote like 3 books on this, and data resource model books, right? And somebody chimed in and said, "Well, but if these work, why would we still be talking about them?" Like, I think they'd been forgotten, is what happened. Now we're rediscovering them. But to your point, that some of this stuff sits on shelves, and then it's all about timing, right? I mean, that's the other part of it. It could be a great idea, but if the time's not right, it don't matter.
Isn't that the case? Yeah, it's like we get to a juncture where there's a lot of pain and there's no alternatives, and we start looking back. Oh, what did somebody else say?
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh, okay, this guy already figured it out. Maybe he didn't even imagine our use case, but he came up with some abstract algorithm or some solution. Or in your case, this has already been out there in data management and
Mm-hmm.
modeling, et cetera. So, yeah, definitely agree. So, research in some form is always important. I worked with a lot of researchers when I was at IBM, and some people used to say, what do they do? Because we were working on a product, and they're like, what are they producing? And the answer is, they don't necessarily know where it's going to go, but the company saw that it was valuable. They put stuff out there, and it may sit on a shelf, but at some point, it may become very valuable. So.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the case for institutions as well, universities,
Yeah.
etc. So that's not, it's not. I know we like to think that all the innovation happens in startups, and I was part of a few startups that were successful. It does, but it tends to be incremental, and it fits an immediate need, not groundbreaking innovation. That one, groundbreaking innovation, tends to sit on a shelf.
Yeah, it does. Well, it's interesting, as a bit of a historical aside too. I mean, it can be argued that the 1880s were actually the most innovative time in human history, right? That was a long time ago now. And in fact, if you look at, quote, innovation right now, with the exception of maybe AI, it's like innovation and I think other metrics are actually declining in America and worldwide. Yeah. And I think that, if you look at, there's a lot of popular books I can recommend to the audience, but this is true. So to your point, we like to put ourselves in a pedestal and think that we're in this unique time in history. But as I've been doing a lot of research for my own book, it's like it's very clear a lot of the stuff we're doing decades old. There's not a lot new here. You just need to go find it. But that's a trick, because there's a lot of this stuff is like, it's like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, is what I described to my audience on Friday. It's like you're lucky if you can find them. But yeah, well, awesome. We had great chat. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
LinkedIn's great. So
LinkedIn, right.
If any of this is interesting to you, this conversation, just contact me on LinkedIn. Love to chat.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, you got a lot of great posts. I think that's why I reached out and just wanted to have a chat. I think that you I don't know if it's a function of just your experience or the fact you might be removed from, I think, the typical geographical bubbles as well, because you're in New Mexico, but you just have a very original thought process around our industry that I don't see that often. So
yeah, I guess New Mexico definitely is a bubble for sure. I'm not sure what the secret sauce is, but I'm glad you appreciate it. You don't often hear about, like, sometimes I hear from time to time, oh, I like your post, but I just put it out there into the ether, and if someone likes it, that's awesome.
Well, New Mexico is underrated. I mean, you have a lot of technology innovation going on. Speaking of which, right, like Sandia and other places.
Los Alamos.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty small players. Just kidding. So, are you going to check out that Oppenheimer movie when it comes out?
I am. Yeah,
that looks really good. Are you going to see it, Matt?
Planning to. Yeah. It looks kind of. I've heard it's kind of terrifying too, but we'll see.
I mean, the topic matter is kind of terrifying.
Nuclear weapons. Yeah. Mass destruction.
Yeah. Lighthearted stuff. So cool. Yeah, thanks for being on the show, Andrew. Matt, where are you right now?
I am in San Francisco at the moment, so I am at the Databricks Summit, so Data plus AI Summit. And so if you're interested in meeting, hanging out, whatever, definitely say hello while I'm in town.
Cool. Yeah, and tomorrow night, and I will be at the Mage Magic Meetup at the Alchemist Bar in San Francisco. And what is it? Wednesday, we're doing an event with Stream, I think at Mission Rock. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be doing a recap of Snowflake and Data and AI Summit, and kind of drawing some comparisons between that, signing some books, getting some drinks. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. There's a rumor I might be in Vegas tonight at Ethan Aaron's low-key happy hour. I cannot confirm or deny. You'll just need to show up. So find out. So
you're the new Bill Murray of data, I guess, right?
I don't know. I've taken more inspiration from him every day. He seems like a cool dude.
So, are you going to be washing dishes in the back, Joe?
I'll be bartending, actually. Yes.
Okay. I'm wearing a fake mustache or maybe a fake beard or looking like me or something.
Exactly. So yeah, that should be a lot of fun. But yeah, lots of cool stuff happening. I think everyone's trying to finally figured out where they're going to be at, since these vendors decided to have their conference in the same week, on the same days. But it's what it is. So, but yeah, awesome. Well, Andrew, it's a lot of fun. Next week we have who do we have actually? Is it Andrew Jones on the show? I think talking about data contracts, Matt. Let me just double check here. So, yeah, I think it's the Andrew Jones. So it's the 2 weeks of Andrew is here. So,
yeah, and he's writing a book right now on data contracts, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. I think he's the guy that came up with the term, actually. So as far as I can tell.
Oh, that part I was not aware of. Okay,
yep.
This should be a lot of fun. And Andrew Padilla, thanks for bringing up this idea. I mean, I love this conversation about having multiple data contracts. It's something I never really thought about, and so we'll probably bring that up on the show next week as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look forward to listening to that one.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Take care. See you, audience. Bye-bye.
Yep.